I do think the time now is more appropriate to escalate a discussion on a need for a Labor Party. I'm here really to carry on this discussion, and I would hope that it is a discussion, and it's essentially a discussion I wish to have with trade unionists. The timeline I see is not a short timeline, but like everything else in life, and certainly those of us who have looked at the events in Eastern Europe recently understand that sometimes history moves faster than any of us could imagine. I worked on an automobile assembly line in 1946. I think it was Ford Motor Company in Edgewater, New Jersey, making 59 cars an hour and working as fast as my little legs and arms could carry me. And my vision of work changed from that time. So I understood that it was the job of trade unions to civilize work, that it was the job of trade unions to fulfill a vision of a shorter work week, of humane working conditions where workers had control over their lives at the point of production, and had some power. I always remember walking into that plant and remember being reduced from an adult to a child, raised my hand to go to the bathroom, waited for a relief man, and all the indignities that are imposed upon us at work. And we had a good union. UAW was a fighting union, and that was a time when we didn't even have a grievance procedure. If we didn't like what happened that day at work, we didn't work the next day, and that's how we resolved problems. And I recall the strike wave of '48. My own union was a leader here in California, and of course I recall the struggle to fight the implementation of the Taft-Hartley Act. I was in New York City, which was a union town, and we put near 1 million people in the street, all trade unionists. In those days, we called a meeting. I remember myself at a central labor body that was packed to the rafters, which they always were, and we're fighting over the minimum wage, and I called for a shop stewards meeting citywide. And it wasn't surprising, you know, we filled Madison Square Garden just with shop stewards. 25,000 shop stewards came out to a meeting at the Garden. We filled it. In those days, you could do that. It was tremendous union consciousness. Those of you who are around recall it. Cities were union towns. We had a tremendous impact on society. Then I think the way I can describe the movement today is that workers perceive us, I think if we wish to be honest, of course any description I make is not meant to be absolutely universal, but I think it represents certainly the majority of situations. I think working people feel very impotent and powerless, and they look at they're cynical too. They view institutions, unions, bosses, the government is screwing them. But a lot of our problems certainly are not of our own making, and we have a lot of problems in the trade union movement. Certainly the globalization of the economy has a great deal to do with our powerlessness. I know what it is to deal with multinational companies. I've dealt with them all my working life. And I know what it is to sit across the bargaining table with a company that sales exceed the gross national product of every country in the world but 8. That's, you know, a description of an oil company. And that's power. And a power not to be able to shut them down. And if you do strike, and we've struck some facilities for a year straight, and not shut off an ounce of product because the companies are highly rationalized, automated. They certainly are able to move their profit center around, bring in product from abroad. I hear a lot of the leadership bemoan the fact that American workers don't vote. And they don't. I mean, but I think that's a sign of the sophistication of American workers. Because what they are saying is, and I think they're saying it very clearly, it doesn't matter. 50% of the people now say it doesn't matter. I noticed with great interest in Eastern Europe, in countries that are now having elections for the first time, there's a place on a ballot, none of the above. And American workers have been voting none of the above in increasing numbers. And they're now at 50%. And I know that that 50% has been described by some people as the third party of the non-voter. It's a very powerful force out there that if they decided to enter the political electoral process and voted, they would tip the scales in either a progressive direction or in a direction that most of us would not agree with who sit in this room. I think there's a whole reservoir of people out there ready to respond to a clarion call by someone who begins to address their interests, their economic interests. And that clarion call could come from someone who is demagogic and can lead people down a road that could lead to the type of ugliness in this society that I know that everybody here rejects. And they're also ready to follow those who lay out a path that makes sense, that would advance the interests of the American people. And what's the program? What's the program for American workers? There are people openly expressing the fact that our wages should be reduced to those of third world countries. They don't even subtly talk about that. You can find direct expressions saying, we got to get wages down here to be competitive. And anytime you compete with wages, you're going to go down to the wages of $1 an hour, $2 an hour, $3 an hour. There's no way we can compete on wages. And we once were proud of the fact that we were a movement based on the notion that you took wages out of competition. You leveled off wages wherever you went. If you worked in Birmingham, Alabama, or in New York, you got the same wage for the same work. And that's fast disappearing. So there's a general perception out there that no one has an answer for working people's problems. And the answers that the political parties have is that you got to tighten your belt and you've got to take less because we got to compete with everybody and their grandmother, and there's no way we can do that. What we need is we need cooperation rather than competition. We need solidarity rather than being pitted against one another. So I propose that it's time to begin to consider a structure that can deal with this. A party, my proposal is that forming a party in this country, which is not a parliamentary system, is, first of all, organize working people through their representatives, and working people who form a new party, and I propose a Labor Party, have to define what they wish to stand for. And I'm absolutely opposed to a few of us holding up in a room and drawing up a manifesto and coming out and say, listen, this is what's good for everybody, and this is what we propose. I think what we propose has to be argued out in halls like this all over America, and that I have no idea what the ultimate program should consist of. I do know that we need an instrument, a party, in order to express it, to provide the space for the arguing out of what that program should be. And I think if we begin to argue what a program should be within a party structure, we'll attract tens of thousands and millions of Americans into a party like that. I think Americans are waiting for such a party. I think it'll be much easier for Labor to organize because people say that's a movement that we want to identify with. And that's a movement, even if I can't move the boss, I'm going to be able to be part of a movement that moves the government. Because I tell you very frankly, I don't think you can negotiate with the boss in every instance. And I think we should be negotiating with the state in many instances. The question of insurance, I challenge anybody. I challenge anybody in America, in the trade union, to show me that they can negotiate improvements in their health insurance plans. The entire movement's in retreat. There's no place to go but down. We should be negotiating with the state, the government. We need national health care. We should be negotiating like our Western European brothers. I mean, this is the only country in the world where you enter the workforce and you have to arrange with the boss for your vacations. Christ, I was in Italy recently. A worker walks into the workplace, it's 4 weeks vacation. It's a state. The working people have negotiated with the state. Here we have all sorts of absentee control programs being imposed. You know, if you're absent 2 days or 3 days, you don't hear of that there because Your sick leave is guaranteed by the state. Your insurance is guaranteed by the state. Your vacations are guaranteed by the state. Your holidays are guaranteed by the state. That's out of the bargaining arena. We need a Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party I'm proposing, which creates a hell of a lot of problems with people. I don't think it's possible to form a party and get into an electoral arena. I always tell my friends who want to get elected, I say, you know, be careful, you're liable to get elected. Because what the hell are you going to do when you get elected? What's the program? How are you going to move a program? All you'll do is spread disillusionment, cynicism. People say it's more of the same garbage. It'll be confusion, and it'll be a collapse of a movement. I think it takes time before you challenge for power. I think before one runs for an election, they have to have clearly in their mind what they stand for, not as individuals, but as a movement. We have to define that program. So I would propose a party that's non-electoral. It's a party that forms, it's based on congressional districts. We begin to beat out a program. We begin to articulate this program all over America. And when we're ready to challenge for electoral power, we'll know when that time is. So I think the importance of a meeting like this is that you've got to begin to discuss these options. I believe there are 1 million people out there who are ready to join overnight in a party. I think this party has got to be a dues-paying party that people join. It's got to produce its own newspaper that speaks to the truth and speaks to the type of issues and is distributable across the nation as a whole. We're not going to have the established press establishment voice our story. We need the type of organized movement that is possible to be born overnight because, look, I can recall George Wallace getting up and saying there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties attracting tens of millions of people into that party, and he stood for the wrong thing. And there are a lot of people in the wings who stand for the wrong thing, are ready to get out there and say there's not a dime's worth of difference between these parties, getting out there to talk to the economic ills of the American people. And I'm old enough to remember turning on a radio with the same line, and it attracted a hell of a lot of people. And they may not be of the same character. It'll have the subtleties of the American scene, but I'm convinced that if there's not a third party created by working people, there's going to be a third party created by those who oppose the interests of working people, and we'll be further victimized and powerless to move, because that'll be a party be really backed by the force of the state. So for the purpose of this meeting, I would suggest to discuss a party that doesn't engage in electoral politics. My position is I think the American labor movement, most people who are caught up in electoral politics aren't about to retreat from it tomorrow morning. And I'm saying, look, vote for who you want to vote for. But alongside of that development has to be the development of a party that begins to beat out a cadence that begins to raise issues that strike at the heart of the problem and talk to those workers in the shops, both organized and unorganized, that strike right to where they just intuitively feel is a responsive chord. When you go in and talk to workers about the programs of a national health insurance and shorter work weeks and pay if you don't work, all the type of social programs that I know that you support, and speak to it through an organizational structure, we'll begin to even move the established parties, because if you expose them for what they are, they're going to have to be responsive. It's a very, even in the development of a third party of the type I suggest, we'll begin to force the parties to pay attention to the type of proposals I know we're capable of formulating. So, brothers and sisters, I didn't come here to make a speech, but really to start this national argument. It's not starting here. This type of discussion's been taking place, but it's escalating. More people are coming out all over the United States, even if nothing to shoot down the idea. They're coming out. We're pulling them away from their television sets to come out and say, hey, something's afoot and something's moving out there, and there are tens of millions of people ready to respond. I don't think people are going to climb the barricades tomorrow morning, but I think that people are ready for a serious discussion about the need for alternative political options. And with that, certainly I'd like to hear your own views and your own comments, and whether to not attack, I hate to use that word, but certainly I have very thick skin, and I don't want anybody to be reticent to take on these ideas. As I said, I've been through enough trade union struggles to understand that nothing comes easy. But the one thing that is important is that we're never afraid to express ourselves in any forum that's created for us. I think we can invigorate the trade union movement just by instituting this argument. I'm appalled when I go to union meetings and nobody's there. And nobody's there because there's really nothing to say. I always ask my friends in the trade union movement, what are you complaining about? Nobody coming out to the union meeting. All I hear is about John Jones has this grievance, and he's 98,000 on the list, and 3 years from now, you know, the grievance going to arbitration. There's this type of dismal discussion that takes place, and I don't know what you would tell people if they all came out to a union meeting at once. But if we had a vigorous program to discuss, a new direction to discuss, a program that addressed the interest on how to fight the bosses as equals and to deal with power and how to achieve power, I think we'd fill the union halls. And those union halls will again reverberate like they once did. And that echo that comes out of those union halls will be heard throughout America.